I just add one other dimension to what we're talking about here, and that is that I actually think the Russians, and this includes Putin, and I think you see it with the Chinese too, they believe that we are strategic idiots, and they believe that we do things that are not in our interest. And if you go around the world and you talk to lots of people who are not in the West about, American policy, for example, vis-a-vis Israel and what's going on in Gaza and what just recently happened with Iran, they simply can't believe that we're allowing ourselves to be pulled into this situation. They just think we're nuts. And they think that what we're doing in Ukraine is remarkably foolish. The whole idea of expanding Ukraine, NATO into Ukraine, when the Russians made it clear that they viewed this as an existential threat. And then you have the trouble start in February 2014, and the Americans, instead of backing off and trying to work some sort of modus vivendi out with the Russians, double down, and we end up in a war. And I think a lot of people think, and I certainly think this, and I know you do too, that this just doesn't make good strategic sense. So the Americans are, they're kind of boobs when it comes to planning and executing their grand strategy or their foreign policy. And if you look at all the trouble that we're in around the world, I mean, the situation in the Middle East is turned into a disaster, and there's no hope of it improving anytime soon. The situation in Ukraine, as we have just talked about, is disastrous, and there's no hope of that improving anytime soon from our point of view. And meanwhile, there's huge potential for trouble in East Asia, especially in places like the South China Sea or over Taiwan. And, we've lost our focus there. We're not focusing on the ball out there. So the United States is just in one heck of a lot of trouble.
So let me ask you this in the last few minutes we have here. I think it's self-evident, as you just articulated there, we don't have at least a coherent national strategy. What do you think is the no kidding reason why we don't have that, and what is our foreign policy objective and drive in the administration? What do you think actually animates their decision making? Because there's got to be something. I mean, they can't literally just be going, I don't know, whatever, let's just do this today. There has to be something, but I can't identify it, and I'm wondering if you can.
Well, first of all, they think there's no limits, right? The whole idea of prioritizing is not part of their worldview. My view is if you're concerned about East Asia, you're concerned about Ukraine, and you're concerned about the Middle East, you can't deal with all three of those areas of the world at once and give them all equal attention. You have to prioritize, but that's not the way the United States thinks. The United States is run by people who think that we can run the world and we don't have to prioritize. Second thing is that I think that the American foreign policy establishment is filled with people who don't have a good sense of the limits of military force. They think the United States is incredibly powerful from a military point of view, and it can wield that military instrument in really effective ways to get what it wants pretty much everywhere on the planet. And if it doesn't use military force, it can use economic sanctions. And those economic sanctions are a deadly effective weapon. And I think there's no question that if you're a great power like the United States, you do want to have a formidable military. I think you do want to have the most formidable military on the planet. But I think it's very important to understand that there are huge limits in terms of what that military can do for you. And if you wander into places like Iraq or Afghanistan, you want to understand that you're going to get yourself in a lot of trouble. And the military is not going to provide a magic weapon for solving most of the problems you face in Iraq or in Afghanistan. But I think most American elites don't really have that healthy appreciation of the military instrument. Yeah. What's happened here is we have a foreign policy that is concerned with running the world not prioritizing and using lots of military force or economic sanctions to get our way. And what's happened is that, new centers of power in places like China and Russia and even India have come online. And furthermore, you have adversaries who have lots of missiles like Hezbollah and the Iranians. And this makes it very difficult for us to get our way and to execute this foreign policy that we've designed. And we don't seem to learn. I think this is due in good part to the fact that we have hardly any accountability in the American system. People don't get punished for their mistakes. They go to a think tank after they're done, then they come back in the next administration. So there's little accountability, little learning. And this, I think, explains in part, it's just a partial explanation, but I think it explains in good part, why we're in such a mess today.
Yeah, I think that is obviously politics and electoral politics is another big influence in that. But I think that the bigger issue, as you say, is the most rational explanation. We still think this is 1990 or maybe even 2003 when we could literally do whatever we want, tell even our allies to go hang themselves, our adversaries, we're going to do whatever we're going to want to do, and they couldn't do anything about it really. That world doesn't exist anymore, and we have not figured that out yet, and we may soon to our demise.